So the Zera Shimshon in preparation for Pesach in Parshas Va'era, page Tav Kuf Tes Zayin. If you can see in the left column, he says Ubetam Elu Ha'arba Lashonos Shal Geula.
I have it.
To explain the four languages of redemption. Mevad Mashkasafti Le'al B'Parshas Shemos. So I talked about it earlier in the Sefer. Od Yesh Lomar. So the Zera Shimshon, I'm going to try to explain this outside first, is going to develop for us a theme within the process of the Seder. And I think this is such an important thing to do, because we tend to look at all the mitzvahs as individual mitzvahs and the parts of the Seder as maybe disjointed to a certain extent. What he wants is to create a running theme throughout the Seder. So he says, Od yesh lo Hashem keneged daled devarim ikarim l'shleimus ha'adam la'avodas boro. There are four principles which you need to connect and to become a servant of God, which is what Pesach is really about. Shehotzesi, when it says, I've taken you out. Shehotzesi eschem, Romez liyedias v'akaras mahus hatov v'haschar v'hara v'ha'onesh, is the first step is to become aware of what is good, what is reward, what is bad, and what is punishment. So step one of becoming a servant of God, no actions, just to know the difference between right and wrong, between what God wants and what God doesn't want, what you will be rewarded for, what you'll be punished for. Shemishu b'tzar, so while someone's in pain, hu taru du matur, if that person is busy and confused, ve'en lo das lahakir mahus hatov v'mahus hara, they're unable to recognize the difference between right and wrong. Amnam kishiyetze me'atzar, when a person leaves the pain, maschel lahakir ubali de yediyah, you come to knowledge. And this is so important, because as a slave, you don't get to make any choices. You don't get to make any moral decisions. It's about survival, and there is no right and wrong because you're not in charge of yourself. And the first thing that happens is you have to start to recognize what's right and what's wrong.
Was that like a trial and error type of? Like the servant is doing this, and if he doesn't, he gets slapped.
No. We're talking about your own choices, your free will. Then the next step that Hashem does for us is He saves us from the service. Hainu ha'havdala is to make that separation. To actually separate ourselves from the servitude of the Egyptians, be'me avodas hanefesh on a spiritual level, be'me avodas haguf from the physical level, which means step two, once you know the difference between good and evil, then you can separate yourself from evil. That's step two. It says, Mishchu kechu lachem, the verse states, draw and take for yourself a sheep. And we say, Mishchu yidechem yavodazar, draw yourself away from the idol worship. Rashi al pasuk ki kala osher asher hitzel, kala tzar shebemikra lashon hafrasha. The word v'hitzalti means to separate, to distance, to pull away. So step two is to separate yourself from bad. Again, step one is to know the difference between good and bad. Step two is to separate from bad. V'go'alti eschem, I will redeem you. Neged azrizus mevia l'dei nekios. That's the alacrity, the movement, the speed which leads you to cleanliness. And nekiyos mevia aichbali de tchias amesim mevia sadiyahu, till you reach the level where you can bring the revival of the dead and connect to Eliyahu. Part of the step is to actually get yourself moving. To separate yourself is much more to distance yourself and to walk away from. But now we're talking about motivation and getting yourself to be the kind of person who is the way you want to be. And it's this kind of attribute that God wanted when He forced us to be in a state of haste. God could have said, we're leaving tomorrow at noon, but instead, Hashem says, I want you to sit there at the table with your staff in hand and your shoes on. I want you to stand there ready to go, because that's the way, the kind of people that you need to be, that you are just ready to go at the drop of a hat. I redeemed you with alacrity and with haste, all in one moment. And you'll see how this all ties together, these 4 steps. And then once you've gotten, then you can become the people of Hashem. You go through the daily grind of day to day, being consistent and following through in the right way. Let's repeat those 4 steps once more, because it's brilliant the way he's going to tie so many different things together. Step 1 is to know. You become from, or if you are fixing yourself in one area, or someone who's becoming, converting, or all of Klal Yisrael becoming a people. Step 1 is just to know what the information, right and wrong. Step 2 is to begin the process of separating and moving away from things he's just supposed to separate from. Step 3 is creating the alacrity and the speed and the motivation to connect to the things that you need to connect to. And step 4 is following through day after day, consistently doing what you need to do. Now let's look at, so he says, those are the 4 cups. The 4 cups, each one is supposed to get you, much like the Jewish people went from being slaves in Egypt to becoming the chosen people. These 4 cups represent these 4 stages. He says, now you'll understand, there's 4 kezesim that we eat. HaKazayis Arishon, the first Kazayis which we eat, Hu Shalamotzi Lechem, is just to fulfill the mitzvah of eating bread, in this case matzah, on Pesach night for the Yom Tov. You know why it's bread? Because bread represents the difference, knowing the difference between right and wrong. Because without knowledge, without awareness, you can't know anything. So he's not really going into this at length, although we'll quote it. The halacha is that certainly in the days of our, you're not supposed to daven or learn next to excrement. What about a baby? A baby has excrement in the diaper. So if the child is of a certain age, then the excrement becomes prohibited. What's the age? So our sages say when the child is on the level that they eat grain. Fascinating measure. Why is that? Because the innocence, there's no evil inclination in a baby, but we know children have an evil inclination that comes. It kicks in when the maturity to be able to eat grain kicks in. Right? There's an opinion that the tree of Adam Arishon was a chita, was a wheat tree, because that creates the knowledge of good and evil. So he says the first matzah that you eat is awareness, just to know the difference between right and wrong. When the child reaches the age where they can eat grain, at that point you have to separate from their excrement. Okay. Then at the same time that you eat this matzah, which gives you awareness, you're also eating a second kazayas from the middle matzah. That represents separating yourself from the evil. Shekala Avdalas Teluya B'chut Asara Bein Nishchad Ruba Shalkana Nishchad Chatzio Dahainu Chut Asara. He says because actually distancing yourself between right and wrong doesn't work the way most people would like it to work. There are no clear boundaries between right and wrong. Yes, we can all say murder is a good thing, and we can all say is a bad thing, and charity is a good thing. That's easy for us to say, but we're not challenged there. It's the areas which are so gray. That's where our challenges are day to day. And the eating of that matzah, the second kazayas, the one, that broken piece of matzah that we're eating a kazayas from, that represents separating ourselves from the evil.
And it's separated too, that's broken. It's
Right. So look at this. V'chenami osias chametz and mamish kama osias matzah. As you know, chametz and matzah are the same letters, but one's a ches and one's a hey. It's a hair's breadth distance between them. Nearest ches till it doesn't look like a ches. And so the second piece of matzah which we eat, which, by the way, we eat in 1 and 2 together, as we mentioned, because the first time you eat 2 kizes and one from the top matzah, which represents knowledge of good and evil, and then the second matzah, the middle matzah, the smaller piece which you eat, represents the separation between the hay and the ches, knowing the difference between right and wrong. Hakazayis ashlishi shal korech, the third kazayis, that's motivation, self-motivation, inspiration to start doing good things. That's when we were representing the eating of the Pesach and the matzah and the maror. What does Pesach mean? Hashem skipped over the houses, and that was eaten in haste. So that third one, the third matzah, is the eating of alacrity, of movement, of speed, of haste, to tell you that you need to really get yourself moving in order to be a better person. The fourth is the consistency. I eat the matzah, and I don't let the taste of the matzah go away from me. Because you have to constantly be keeping with you the good that you are doing by the eating of the matzah.
That's the piece that we eat at the very end of the meal, because the taste stays with you.
That actually goes very well with the answer given to the Chacham.
Right, exactly. Very good, very good. That's great. So now he's going to take this further. He says there's 4 elements: earth, fire, wind, and water. Hayisoda afar, the fundamental element of earth, that's just knowledge. Being able to plant is saying this is for wheat, this is for barley. If you don't know, it's all a waste. Water, that's the realm of separation. Sweet water from wells, which you could drink, from salt water, which you can't drink. If there is no separation, you can't drink them. And it's interesting that the first separation in all of creation is so that's that separation and distancing yourself from the negative. And you saw the ruach, the wind, who is rizus, that's movement. Beginning. But the wind passes, it passes quickly, but there is not yet the consistency. But the fire is above them all. Hashem's word is like fire. Fire continues to burn as long as the fuel is there. It doesn't stop, it doesn't take a break, it's just all consuming.
The makos are also based on those 4 elements, right?
Right. Everything. He says everything ties into these 4. Look at the 4 exiles. Galus Arishan, the first exile, Anu Bavel, Shama Yisrael Michasarim Yediya Veheker. At that point, the Jewish people were lacking knowledge of the difference between good and evil. We see that Yecheskel is trying to describe to the people what God is, because they had no knowledge of anything. Begalus Madai in media, Hikira Hevdel Sheyesh Ben Yisrael Amim. That's when we differentiated between the Jews and the non-Jews. That's the separation between the Jew and the non-Jew.
It's 2 exiles. They consider it to be 2 exiles.
It's considered 2 separate exiles.
And
Yeah.
which ones 2?
Well, Babylon versus Persia.
Is that why
Persia
we say,
media? Even though they're a continuation of one or the other, but
Just suppose one from the other.
yeah, but they're considered a separate exile.
Is that why we say La Yehudim and Havdalah?
Nice.
And the
flying
key
into
of
their
Zera
lab.
was that they went to the party
That's
with the Persians,
That's from
Right, and they didn't separate.
and they
Right.
didn't separate.
Oh, very good. So that would be what Purim is all about, is the separation. But that's great. I mean, the simple reading is because Ora, well, now we have light, we have, but that's
Based
great.
on what he's saying.
Yeah, like Yehuda Mosa Ora is Havdalah. That's great. Okay.
I'm just like, how does it relate the Yehudim to what you say?
Because
'Cause
the
he-
Yehudim was from the Megillah, and we're saying Havdalah, the Havdel.
He's saying the four exiles, Bavel is knowledge of right and wrong, and Persia or Media represents separation from what's wrong, while Greece is the next step
So
connecting
we
to what's
include a
good.
sentence from the Megillah in Havdalah because it represents the Mavdil Bein.
Very
Now we
good.
need to separate ourselves from the media.
It's not,
Right.
it's not like.
Hashlishi hu Yava, number 3 is Greece. Shenizdarzu b'mitzvos neged gezeres ha'ovim, that the Jewish people had to move forward and do mitzvos in order to overcome them. V'od yatzu mi'afela la'ora v'yavsheli yizrizim al makam or shebechoshech and zrizis. That represents going from darkness to light. That was zrizis, motivation, doing, the guerrilla warfare, the getting out there, the lighting the menorah. It was all about doing.
I have trouble with Greece. I don't think it came out
There's a
with it right.
sap for that.
But,
No fried chicken.
there's, I mean, they really weren't exiled, they were within Eretz
You mean what?
Yisrael.
Right, but there's different kinds of exiles. And, he's not inventing what the four exiles are. We know it's Babylon,
I'm just for my
Media
own-
Greece,
for my own
but
purposes.
they were in exile within the land. It's actually the only one where they were considered in exile within the land. But they were in exile. We were subjugated by the Greeks. They prohibited the performance of mitzvahs. They prohibited Torah and everything. All right, we're going to read just the rest of this paragraph, then we'll. Haraviyu galus hazeh. The fourth is this exile. Shekol kach aruch u'masma v'seinu rabim. This is the consistent exile. The fisha Esav hisme v'kibud aveim, and Esav has this power because he was consistent in honoring his parents. V'anu begalus hazeh eino lamasidu esker Torah mitzvahs. We of course we have pockets where we do Torah mitzvahs, but we never have that consistency and constant performance. When the time will come, Hashem will redeem us. Then this exile, when we come out of it, it will be a constant and a forever redemption, because that's the challenge of this exile. Continuing on the page Tav Kuf Yud Ches, V'od yesh lomar, he brings a further explanation, and this is somewhat independent from what we said before. Shematzinu sheparo chata b'chamisha chushav. Paro, in his guilt, transgressed using all 5 senses. Shebechush haraus, in the terms of sight, asu ayin arab b'nei Yisrael, we find the way that they looked at the Jewish people, as it says, Pen Yirba vayakutsu kekotzim hayu beineim. It says vayakutsu mipnei b'nei Yisrael, that they looked at the Jews and they gazed at them with these hateful eyes. And that's the first step towards beginning to hate the Jews, is the way that they look at us. B'chush Hashema, then he was told, and he couldn't hear. Amar lo yadati es Hashem, he denied. He said, I have not heard of Hashem. I've never heard God. And his continuing refusal to listen to God is considered a failure in hearing. And the scent, they said, you made our, you use a strange expression, the guards who came complaining to Moshe, they said, you've made our stink come before Paro. In terms of taste, it says, and it says, the Jewish people complained, we remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt. How could that be? They weren't even giving them straw. How would they be giving them fish? And the contrary, their food was all limited and restricted. And all the women were able to gather water and fish and that whole story. And the point is, they didn't feed them enough, and that's the sense of taste. And the sense of touch, that's the easiest one. Vayakushu to Bnei Yisrael was all the beatings that they gave the Jewish people. L'chein laka eser makas, that's why he gets 10 plagues. B'kol chush laka shtei makas, and each sense got 2 plagues. B'chusha ra'us, this is the easy one of them. Ha'ilem choshech va'afela, darkness is clearly against sight. V'gam makas arov, but also the wild animals. T'chsiv v'eflesi b'yomahu es eretz, I will separate the land. Levilti ha'yoscham arv v'samti pedus, b'nemer hafish b'nem ben Yisrael. The biggest miracle of the animals was where they went and where they did not go. And says that was really a message of what they should see. And he's not just playing with the words, but what do we say? What was the crime of the way that they looked of their vision? Was the way that they perceived the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. So now this is what changed their perspective when they saw the animals going here and attacking the Gentile and not attacking the Jew. It actually affected their perspective, which is interesting because now one of the plagues is actually to punish their vision, and one of the plagues is to correct their vision. Keneged ozem, for the ears, ha'ilam kolos elokim ubarad, they had the sounds of the hail. Umakas b'choris t'chsiv b'avatihitz akka gedola b'chal eretz Mitzrayim, there were all the screams in Egypt. So it's interesting. Again, you have.
I thought it was the croaking of the frogs would be that.
Well, he's going elsewhere, but he's saying that interesting. You have a similar kind of thing because in terms of hearing, it was hearing that Hashem is in charge. So again, one of these would be punishment, the screams, and then the bara, the hail, was more to make them realize that there isn't Hashem. Ukeneged achotim, corresponding to the nose, ha'ilam makas hadever, you had the death of the animals, which of course, the stench was the sign of that. And by the frogs it says, and the land stank. So if one was a punishment directly, which was the dying of the animals, but the other one was more corrective measure because the Jews stank in their eyes, and now it was they and their homes that stank. Corresponding to the mouth, makas adam was their attempt to drink water and turn into blood. Megam makas arba, and the locust, she'achal kol esav aretz, which ate all the grass of the land. There was nothing left for them to eat. And that's when the servants came to power screaming, "Don't you know that Egypt is being destroyed?"
And there was a marshal that they were happy at first because they eat locusts, but they all spoiled. They couldn't even eat them.
Right. Very good. That fits exactly with what he's saying. Connected chusha mishas, in the sense of touch. Hayashchin porech was the boils, ababuas, which bubbles. Umakas kinim, and the lice. So the boils and the lice were punishment, and this is just an amazing shot on its own. Not just where he's going to take it next, but an amazing thing that the 5 senses which we find the Egyptians sinned with, and each of the plagues corresponds to these senses. Then you'll ask, but then there should only be 5 plagues. Why is there 2 plagues for each? That God came to punish them from above and below. Now you could do this yourself, see if you can figure out how each one of these breakups, one is from above and one's below. For example, the frogs and the plague of the animals, things like that. Those are hard ones. So go through them and you'll see one is more of a heavenly retribution and one is more of an earthly retribution. That's why when we celebrate our redemption, we have 5 cups, Beleil Pesach. But the 5th cup isn't really the same obligation. In fact, we don't drink the 5th cup. Why would we have a 5th cup if we don't drink it? Yeah. He says, because that last one, which is the sense of smell, where they said, you made the Egyptians stink in our eyes. That's actually caused not by Paro directly, but they were saying that you, Moshe and Aaron, have caused Paro to see us this way. And in fact, that stench that the Jews were in the eyes of the Egyptians was actually a step within the redemption process. Because before breaking down, they have to be at the highest place. That now that this has happened, now they can be redeemed. And this is the next thing he's going to say. It's just beautiful. He says, the fifth cup, as we know, the first four cups represent the four redemptions, meaning counting Egypt. So Egypt, followed by Babylon, followed by Persia, followed by Greece, but the fifth cup represents the final redemption. And we haven't had it yet. We can't drink that cup because we haven't actually experienced that redemption.
Also, it's about your nose. The Reach Nichoach is the Karbanos, which brings us closer to that moment. Unless you have
redemption. Well, he's going to say a little different. He says, as we know, that the Mashiach is associated with the sense of smell. Each of the Redeemers is associated with a different sense. Neged chush hareach, so he says, Kos chamisha simen gula asida, v'neged chush hareach, when the page Tav Kuf Yud Tes, Nefi shekal hashavach shamashiach talu bereach, the prophet describes the Mashiach as being able to smell. He will smell of the fear of God. And then actually Bar Kochva, when he claimed he was Mashiach, the rabbi said to him, well then can you judge based on smell? And the point is that we can't same obligation as the next. He doesn't go into this over here, but it turns out we know that the sense of smell is actually the most spiritual of all the senses. So that's why it's not so connected to the exile, and that's why we can't drink that fifth cup.
Wasn't corrupted.
Right, exactly.
So what do you do with the fifth cup? You throw it away?
We just leave it.
Leave it, how long you leave it? I know some
Until-
some use it for the fourth cup, and then there's the
Right, but the simple thing is that you just fill it and you just pour it back later. So he says, listen to this. V'akos harishon, so the first cup you drink, mechaven l'chush ha'ra'us, is related to the sense of sight. Should be kiddush nosen einavo. We know you're supposed to look at the wine during kiddush. And also, the first cup is made when you see that the night has fallen, that the stars have come out. So the first cup is related to the sense of sight, which is actually the first thing that the Egyptians did, was they saw us in a certain way. That anti-Semitic look corresponding with the makos of Choshech and the makos of Arav, of the wild animals. The Kos Hasheni, the second cup, Neged Chush Hashema, is related to the sense of hearing, which is when Paro refused to hear that there's a God, and the Egyptians refused to listen to let us go. Shkvar Amarnu v'yigadnu labanim godlan nes shalisios tzarnim. So we drink the second cup after we have heard the answers to the questions of the Seder. After we have told our children and spoken to them, and therefore we're using the sense of hearing, then we can drink the second cup. Because unlike Paro, who couldn't hear that there's a God in the world and refused to listen to God, we are able to hear. And when we reach that place, we drink the second cup. The third is the sense of taste. So if eating, which is they sinned by refusing to feed us, by starving us, and as a result of that, they were punished that their drink was taken away with the blood, and their food was taken away by the locust. So we now eat and drink, and we bench. And after benching, we're now at that place, and we drink the third cup. Koser Ravi, the fourth cup, Neged Chusha Mishush, is the sense of touch. Shabo Gomer Mesahalel. Now remember, the sense of touch was their actual beating of us. And they were punished with the sense of touch with the boils and the lice. And so we recite Hallel to celebrate Atzabehem Kesev Ezav, that their idols are all silver and gold. Shabavaduzara Ein Ba Mamish, because the idols are just physical, while our God is spiritual. So he says, Va'od Bo Chamesh Shmiras B'Matzah. We know there's 5 stages to make matzah, where you're supposed to watch the grain. and shas ktsira when you harvest, shas disha when you thresh, shas techina when you grind, shas lisha when you knead, shas afia when you bake. That's knead with a K. And we know that there are 5 different grains that you can use for matzah. There's 5 different vegetables that you can use for maror. Why is everything like that in 5? The answer is because we have 5 senses. And there was the 5 senses which the Egyptians sinned with, the 5 senses which the Egyptians were punished with, and the 5 senses with which we celebrate. Because this is all to allude that on this holy holiday we are to sanctify ourselves, lavod bora, to serve our Creator, chol chamisha chushav, with all 5 senses. Shebebir chametz, because when you destroy the chametz, and you still have almost a week and a half to destroy the chametz, you're not just supposed to be looking for Cheerios. You're not just supposed to be taking a piece of bread and throwing it in the fire. You're missing the whole upper half of Pesach. Yichavein ha'adam, because a person is supposed to intend. Levayer hayetzer hara, to destroy the evil inclination within you. The chol sitra de mesavusa, and all the aspects of impurity. The saor, the leavening, represents the evil inclination who is causing rotting inside of you and causing you to rise, to feel haughty and to feel entitled to do as you please. That's what spiritually we're supposed to be working on when we are destroying the chametz. It's not just a physical mitzvah, it's a spiritual mitzvah. You're not just working with the body and its 5 senses, but we know your neshama has 5 parts. You have a nefesh, a ruach, a neshama, a chaya, and a yechida. Those are the 5 levels, and it would require a whole class just to break down what those 5 are. But they are there's 5 parts to your soul. Because there's 5 parts to your soul, that's why you have 5 senses, not the other way. Because there's 5 parts to your soul, that's why you have 5 senses, and you're supposed to sanctify yourself on all 5 levels.
The Worch, the 5 senses, how do they correspond to the 5 soul levels?
That's a complicated thing, but
I mean,
it would be, touch would be the most physical. Right. It would be, there's some debate whether hearing is higher than seeing. It's a complicated process. Maybe we'll work on that another time. So he says, but also Zman is Kachi Yisrael, that's why the Jewish people sanctify themselves. For Yatsu Minun Sharei Tuma, to leave the 50 levels of Tuma, Hainu Chamesh Pa'amim Eser, because there's 10 aspects to each of the 5. So when the Jewish people, the 50 levels of Tuma, would have meant a full corruption of their sight, of their hearing, of their smelling, of their mouth, and of the sense of touch. And they were at 49 on the edge of not being able to bring themselves out of the darkness that they were in. And it's all these 5 cups, and all these 5 stages of making matzah, and the 5 different kinds of matzah, and the 5 marors that are meant to correspond to each of these levels of the soul.
Again, the last one, I wonder what the last sense was that got us out, the seeing or the hearing?
I would imagine I would assume that the sense of smell is the highest, and therefore it would be some kind of, just sense that the neshama had, of pun intended.
And there's 10 stages.
You're saying it's like 90% and 9/10? The 49th was just short of the 50, there's 9/10, so to speak?
Right, of the 5th of the 5th sense.
There's 10 steps in making bread. That's why we hold the challah with 10 fingers. So it's like dividing by 10. You expand it by 10, that one has 10 steps.
Right, and 5 of those are listed here.
Right.
Because it's really 5 times 2, upper and lower.
Right.
That's why there's 10 makos broken up into 2 pairs of 5. Right.
And is the 5th sense being smell, is that also related to to Gan Eden, where smell was not related to the...
Yeah, that's what the Dr. Nir mentioned before, that was the only sense that they didn't use in the original sin. So, v'od, and then he finishes the final paragraph here. V'od b'pirkei Rabbi Eliezer Omer, chamisha osi shenichbelu b'Torah ba'osis kulam yisod geula. This is also a complicated thing, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. But the Pirkei de Rabbi Lezer develops this idea that there are 5 letters which can be written 2 ways. Either if they're in the middle of a word, they're written one way, but if they appear at the end, they're called the letters the Sophios. Those Sophios letters, meaning the Chaf Sophis, the Mem Sophis, the Nun Sophis, the Pei Sophis, and the Tzadi Sophis, are very, very powerful letters. They are letters which close off and finish off and restrict. Typically, they're considered a sign of severity, of harshness. And they're considered judgment because they cut things off. And you can add a letter to any word and make a new word out of it until you put a sophis. Once you put a sophis, there's nothing more that you can add. And so these letters are typically seen as very harsh and very difficult. But that kind of power, gevura, severity, judgment, isn't bad. It needs to be channeled the right way. So we're told that each of these letters is connected to each one of the redemptions, without going into the complexities of it. But the letter Pei is, which has the regular Pei and the Pei Sophis, is considered to be associated with the Egyptian exile. The Pei Sophis is one of the harshest of all the letters because it's what closes. Aleph, Pei Sophis, is Af. Af is anger, and that's wrath. If you haven't heard this before, I guarantee you've never noticed this. In all of your Shmona Esrei, from Baruch Ata Hashem until Hamavarech Es Amo Yisrael B'Shalom, you won't find a single Pei Sophis. It's the only letter that doesn't appear in all of davening, and in fact, it never appears in Shmona Esrei, ever, except for one kind of Shmona Esrei, which should be easy to guess, but I'll give it to you anyway. Musaf, because the word Musaf actually has a Pei Sophis at the end of it, because when you are in the high spiritual place of Musaf, you can take even the Pei Sophis, this harsh judgment representing the wrath, and even elevate that towards the good. So Moshe shows up and says, people, there is not going to be any more Af. Instead, we are going to have Pakod Yifkod. We're going to use the Pei to leave Mitzrayim. The Pei, the mouth, but the open Pei, we're going to take that harsh judgment and bring it back to a safe place.
And the Pei is how you express anger, and like you said, it's what it is.
Right.
Because you use your mouth.
Right, but now we're allowing more to come. So he says, in the Haggadah we use 5 forms of praise. Take a look in your Haggadah and you'll look at this, you'll see there's 10 terms, 5 of them negative, and 5 positive. Shem neged hey gevuras are representing the 5 judgments. Vehei chasadim ki yadu eliyodim. Torah nitna b'chamisha kolos. And the Torah was also given with 5 times the word kol. Ve'od ki sipur so sipur yitzias Mitzrayim hu lahotzi advarim min hapeh. We're supposed to speak the words because Yitzias Mitzrayim, as he said, the 5 redemptions, the 5 exiles related to the 5 final letters, Mitzrayim associated with the final Pei. So we're fixing that by opening our mouths and speaking. The whole process of the night is really about words. Besod, Peh, Sach. Pesach, the speaking mouth, can know that. The whole Yom Tov is named after the Pei because it's Pakod, Yivkod, we're taking the letter Pei. And as opposed to the final redemption, which is going to be through the letter Tzadi, as it says Tzvi la Tzadik, and that's why Mashiach is referred to as Tzamach Tzadek, because the Tzadi. So he says, the word Haggadah, Hey Gimel Daled Hey, which besides the fact that it starts with a hey and ends with a hey, but the numerical value of the word Haggadah is 17. 5 times 17?
85.
Ola Peh is Peh. So 5 times, meaning if you do all 5 within the Haggadah, it equals 85, which is the fixing of the mouth. And he says, and you have 5 parts of your mouth that do the speaking. There's the throat, the palate, the tongue, the teeth, and the lips. So there's 5 parts of your mouth that are doing the speaking, corresponding to all these 5. Is all of this fits together in the correction of the 5 senses and the 5 parts of your neshama, which the Egyptians were exiling through the 5 different levels of crimes that they were committing. He blunts his teeth. Interesting. Very nice. Okay. Okay, so again, to remember all this is very difficult, but to at least capture the basic concept here, which is that he's saying that all these things, there's a reason, there's a system. If you can see into the depths of the Haggadah, you would see that the pattern being created here is so perfect, how it all fits, how it all intertwines in this way. But the point is that it's all not just an exercise of the mouth. You have to remember the lesson that he made, so you have to take it back to the neshama. You have to be ready to come out after Pesach a better person, a changed person, a more spiritual person, and a more dedicated person. And whether it's the previous Torah which he said about the 4 ways of connecting to Hashem, or the 5 ways that we are challenged, that we face difficulty, we have to destroy the Yetzer Hara that's within us. May we merit that we should be able to lift ourselves up and experience and truly capture the light which comes down, which we're all able to access on Pesach night. Amen.